My challenging goal with this podcast is to provide a library that will help you reach your challenging goals. I want to bring guests with inspirational stories to help you take that first step towards your goal. All I'm asking is to please subscribe to this channel. It helps more than you can ever imagine. Thank you. Chris, welcome to Journey to Point B. I'm so honored to have the chance to interview you today.
I'm excited. I love the path you take to look at leadership, and I'm excited to be on this journey with you.
The topic that we're going to talk today is your journey to being the leader of UFCU today. And I know that you had a long journey there, like 20 plus steps, if I looked correctly into your journey to get to where you are today. But I was wondering if you would start us off, Chris, to tell us a few things about you that would help us understand the leader that you are.
But I think the hardest part is kind of like picking your starting spot of a leader journey. So for me, it goes back when I was young, going back to like, you can look back to being president of your student body or something like that, where you realize that you were actually excited by the opportunity to help people. And so for me, I think that's what it's always come about, is that I think I want to acknowledge that I'm in a spot where I think I can help others and lead from that position. So a lot of times, when I'm at my best, I'm making sure that I'm serving those communities that, or those people that I'm in charge of leading, or I'm serving them really well. When I'm not at my best, I probably am looking for something more personal out of that. And so I think that's where you can I always hold myself accountable to, am I really serving those who rely on me to lead well? And so those are that's probably the core belief. And then the other is that I for sure did not get there on my own, right? So I don't believe that, there's just some natural leaders and others who are not natural leaders. There's some who may have a skill set that aligns to inspiration more, or some align to motivating, or natural galvanizers and motivators. But every single person and every single personality style can lead. It's just you actually have to develop that as a skill set as well.
As you were sharing your leadership style, to say, I had this image of, I know there is a quote or some inspirational writing that, what are you going to do when you get to the top? And the person said, when I get to the top, I'm going to reach down. I'm going to reach down to help other people get up. And then that's the image that I got, that as you are getting up on your leadership, on your on your opportunities that you have, like you are reaching down to support others to climb up as well.
Yeah, I think for leaders, the job of a leader is to lead. And so it's different than being a motivational speaker, right? A lot of times people will see somebody online, or they'll see someone say something and they're like, wow, that was really motivating. I'll bet that person's really smart. And there's many different kinds of leaders that you can be. But if your job is to lead a team or lead an organization or lead a company, that's your job. And so if you're just out and you're not bringing your people along with you, you're actually not leading. You're actually just out walking or talking or doing those things. The job of leading is actually to bring those people along with you and make sure they arrive at the same destination that you're going. And so I think that's a lot of times the responsibility of a leader, is to look around, and if people aren't coming along with you, then you actually have to adjust your style, or make sure that you're setting clarity with that team and saying, are we really clear about where we're going? Or is that a place you guys want to go? Because that journey may not be for everybody, but your job is to actually bring a group of people to a destination or to an accomplishment. And that is the role. And I think so you're right. I think for me, I'm, otherwise I'm just some guy out on a walk versus actually leading an organization.
Yeah. What would you say, Chris, was the beginning of your journey? The moment where you had this need, desire to become a leader?
That's a good question. I think so. I'm one of six kids. My dad is a remarkable man, and he married my mom when she had four children, and so really helped us a lot. But my grandfather was probably one of my biggest influences on me, and what I noticed is when he went around, he knew everybody, and he just kind
Mm.
of, it was a smaller town, Spokane, Washington, but he really was ingrained in that community. And I was so fascinated by that, and I was able to communicate well with people, and that's kind of, I think, where the seed started. But when I really decided I wanted to lead was, I worked for a company and I was a salesperson, and I watched. It was the first time I was in a more of a corporate job, and I began to watch how those leaders could shape the environment for an entire organization, and then people could build their careers, and we could really help companies, and we could work at a national level and global level. So it really was there that I think I woke up and was like, oh, not only do I want to do that, I actually have an aptitude to do that. But it made it so I had to move beyond just my natural skills of being good with people, and I actually had to develop a certain skill set to be able to lead more than just one team. I could manage a team, but could then grow and actually lead a company? And I realized, wow, you actually have to grow those leadership skill sets versus just being good at it naturally.
And what would you say were those key leadership skills that you had to develop?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So some people might be naturally gifted communicator, right? That's something that I've been pretty good at most of my life. But then you have to realize, ooh, you know what I actually need to do is I need to build my accountability because I'm very relational. So, we might have a whole conversation, and it might feel really good for me as a leader to not bring up that performance issue, because we're just relational. But I actually had to realize that the best way I can help you as a leader is to hold you accountable and have that accountability conversation. So those uncomfortable conversations that you have to lean into. And so what I found is leadership journey is a lot about being able to live in two paradoxical spots at the same time. So, where you can be ultimately relational, but you also have to have a high level of accountability, right? Where you can be, amazingly flexible and pivot some things, but you also have to be disciplined. And so
Hmm.
for me, leadership started with self leadership, right? You had to be able to lead yourself first and then be able to lead a team and then be able to lead at a higher level. But really, a lot of my journey started with focusing on self-discipline and self-leadership, and being able to realize, like, if I wasn't steady and I wasn't reliable and if I wasn't dependable, then it was really going to be hard for me to lead, anything of substance.
Yeah, and I like what you said, like pointing out how important it is to have those crucial conversations, those hard
Yeah.
conversations. I've had a chance to speak with leaders, to interview leaders as well, and I hear this pattern that one of the biggest regrets is conversations that were way overdue.
Hmm.
Like they had people leave their companies because they didn't have those conversations in the beginning. If they would have the conversation when the problem came up, then the situation could have been saved. The person maybe would have learn something and remain in the company,
Right.
but oftentimes it would end up to termination because they didn't have those crucial conversations that could have allowed a person to grow into their roles, to learn, to pivot, to do things better.
Yeah, I think some of it is, there's two areas I probably press it into, because that you're right. It's so frustrating on yourself. Like you get mad at you're like, gosh, I saw that coming. So leaders should not be passive, right? Leaders need to stay and be present in the moment. And I think a lot of times as leaders, if I'm coming in, a lot of times we don't build enough buffer So I'm carrying the last meeting into this meeting, and I might not be present for the thing that you said that. And so I think it's really important, I know for me, to make sure that I'm present in every single meeting, that I'm not, carrying the last one, and I build enough time for me to think about that. And then the other one is a lot of times we judge people by how we would do it, instead of realizing that every person we're leading is a little bit unique. And even though you can't lead a really large organization individually with everybody, but those people that you lead directly, especially like your team, how well do you know them? And so do you know about their families? Do you know about their kids and what they're going through, so that you can have a deeper conversation with those people, and then have that accountability conversation early on. Like, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to me? Here's how I'm going to address that. And just because you fall short accountability wise, you don't want those conversations to be like, and then you're out, right? No, it's like, hey, I'm spotting this behavior way in advance. So let's have that conversation before it gets to, but a lot of times people, to your point, wait. And it's just like with your kids, you find out if you didn't discipline early, right? You get so frustrated with them. You're like, yeah, but I never actually did that. And so you're so frustrated with behavior that you're like, yeah, if it was me, I would see that. And you're like, but they're not you. And that's why you're in the role you're in. So make sure you're pointing those things out really early. And I think you're right. There's a lot of leadership failure that comes along. And we all learn that. There's times where you would have someone leave and you're like, oh, son of a gun, I got to own that one and get better.
So you first thought that you want to be a leader. What happened next? How did you become a leader?
One thing I had to learn is that all feedback is a gift, right? And so the hardest feedback is sometimes the biggest gift. And so there were certain things I did because I really liked to hear myself talk. I really liked to have the answers and be the smartest person in the room. I loved that. It felt really good. And you had to move past all of that and realize that your job as a leader is to surround yourself with people that are way smarter than you. And then your job was to bring the best out of them, not just pour the best of you out into them. And so I also had to move. I found that there was a lot of opportunities sometimes to move companies between big companies and small companies. So I've done everything from starting a company and founding all the way through, being one small part in a really big company. And so all of those have opportunities to develop, right? So, and so I think wherever you're working, wherever the people that are listening to this are working, I'd say like use whatever environment you're in to grow those specific skill sets, right? And so I began to learn, like, I was really good as a manager. I could kind of understand that. And then sometimes you might be blocked. And I was like, okay, let's go have some good, honest conversations. Like, what's my realistic shot of getting to the next level if I work on these things? Does that fit my timeline? And if it doesn't, then I might need to make a move based on, one thing is leadership's a career. Like when we talk about it as a skill set and a journey, it's one of those things that you can use that skill set across multiple industries, right? If you're a really good leader in one industry, you may not understand the industry, but you can move over. I've had the ability to work in 5-7 industries over my time, over my career, because a lot of what I do is applicable in multiple places because I focus on like alignment and how do we do that. But a lot of leaders get so locked into the industry that they're in, sometimes that might really help, but sometimes I think actually they inhibit some of their growth because they only know how to do it here, and they begin to think that those leadership principles only apply to this, where there might be other opportunities there. So a little bit of moving around helped, and then just always being open to asking hard questions. So when you're in with somebody who's going to be a mentor to you, or you're asking them to mentor you or just give you advice, go in with really hard questions. Don't just be like, well, what was your most important thing, which is good. But then there's like, how did I present myself to you? Like, were there things I did that were annoying? Were there things I did that were distracting? And ask those questions, because those will be the things that actually end up hampering you down the road.
There are a few things that I want to pick on. But first,
Yeah,
like a quick comment on asking those hard questions. So I think it's so important when we get the opportunity to be mentored to ask those
yeah,
specific questions, like not
right,
general, like ask specific and make it easier for the mentor to give
right,
us the feedback. Because oftentimes we kind of have a knowledge of what we need to improve. An
right,
open-ended question can be just like often not necessarily a waste of time, but doesn't get like it's not so targeted, doesn't give you the
right.
results. But knowing exactly how we did on specific things that we are tracking and making it easier for that feedback to happen, I think it's so important. And you also mentioned alignment. That
Yeah.
alignment seems like the common denominator and like one of your leadership principles that you were able to translate into different industries. So I'm curious, what is alignment for you?
Oh, that's a good
How?
question. So, I look at alignment for me as a couple things. And so I think alignment is the accelerator of everything that you do as a business, right? So when I come into a business, we get really clear about what the goals are. Hey, these are
Mhm.
our goals. Is everybody clear? These are the goals. And so if everyone's like, yeah, then we look at all the things that don't align to getting us to those goals. And what you find out is you have all these massive behaviors, whether it's working with an individual or working with a team, that don't align to that. So, like I said, first I had to start with my own journey and be like, okay, if I'm going to um, achieve what I want to achieve in my career, are what has to stop, right? I'm like, okay, like, guess what? Okay, these things don't align to that, right? If I want a happy marriage, right? What are the behaviors that are going to align myself to a happy marriage? And then you look at a company the same way and you're like, okay, I know we're saying like our number one goal is X, but why are we spending so much time over here on Y? Why is all the money going over to these things that just doesn't align to that? Or why are we looking at this group of customers when this group of customers is actually where we make our money, right? And so how do you just look at getting clarity on the goal, and then you begin to cut off and stop doing the activities? Because a lot of times, you'll hear this from people. It's like, we're so busy, I'm like, great, what do we need to stop doing? And everyone says that, but stopping doing things is really hard, because you got to give people an
Mhm.
alternative, because they don't want to just stop. They want to then start working on something else, and that is more productive, more in line with a goal, more in line with their goal of getting their career moving. And so also understanding the people that work for you or work with you, what are their goals, so that you can also make sure that not just corporately you're aligned, but that the work someone's doing is aligned with where they want to go in theirs too. And I found multiple times where people are working on things and you're like, yeah, but that doesn't even align to what you want to do.
Mhm.
And you find out that they're not as motivated, they're not, and then all of a sudden you get them aligned, and all of a sudden their superpowers start to go ahead. Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, he had this talk. He was an engineer, and I'm not an engineer, so I love how his mind works. But he would talk about wanting to work 80% of the time in where his superpowers kind of were. He called it best in the world. And the things I'm best in the world that I want to work 80% of my time, and he would track it. And so that caught on to me really well, is where I'm going to make the biggest difference, is where I'm aligned. Most of my time is spent where I have my greatest strengths. And so that personal alignment and corporate alignment, I think, is really important for leaders to look at, because you're going to be the most successful there. That your team's going to be the most successful there if you spend most of that time unlocking their superpowers. And but we don't do it. And I think that's where I've been able to differentiate, I think, a little bit on the performance side.
Yeah, I think that's so important to know exactly that when you go into a company, because it seems for me from the outside, it seems so
Yeah.
intimidating for someone to come and become the executive vice president of a credit union. It's intimidating. Like, where do you even start? But it
Mm,
seems like for you, if you think, okay, let's go to alignment. that's helps you also focus, and also looking at what other people are like, what are their gifts, as you said, that
Yeah.
to make sure that it's in alignment. I've heard this idea that at times we run someone else's race by
Mm,
mistake. Sometimes we join the wrong race, but at times we are put to run the wrong
yeah.
race, and there's nothing worse that you can do with someone than putting them into a place where they don't belong there, not for
Yeah.
there, it's just it's not aligned. We'll go back to that alignment. In your leadership journey, what would
Mhm.
you say, Chris, that was one of the biggest challenges?
Um, I think I think one of the biggest challenges is um, I would say two. I know you asked for one. So one
Yeah.
is when you hit your first ceiling, right? And what I mean by that is you kind of have a natural talent or a natural skill, and it doesn't matter whether you're leading a team or you're building a company or you're something, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do that, or I'm not quite as good as I thought I was, or the result just didn't turn out the way you thought it would, and you kind of hit that first, oh, that didn't work, and you had it all laid out and it just didn't work, and so that resiliency, where do you find the resiliency? And so we built a couple of companies, and I'm like, okay, I got this trajectory and it's a plan, and then all of a sudden I found myself like, oh crud, like that didn't work the way I thought it was going to do, and now I've got to, people talk about pulling yourself up. What you find is you got to have some resiliency, and then you got to have a group of people around you that can help you shape and learn, and say, you're actually pretty good at this, you're actually pretty good at this, you're not as good at this, and so how to pick those spots, and then realizing, I think for some, that you can be running really well and not everyone's going to come along on the journey with you the whole way. People talk about, I don't live a life, you've probably a phrase that has been said for generations, it's really lonely at the top, right? And so
Hmm.
people will say that as a leader, it's lonely. I don't abide by that one. I really try and live a much more relational life, and but there is an element that people may want something from you, as when you're leading an organization or you're leading a company, or you're more, you might have a more famous profile, and so people may want something from you. I think that's true, but then there's people that you're close with, that just, your journeys aren't going to be parallel forever. And what do
Hmm.
you do in those moments when you know what you're supposed to do, and they know what they're supposed to do, or you know what they're supposed to do, because it's not aligning anymore? And how do you make those really hard decisions about separating at a company level? I think that's one of the hardest things we don't talk a lot about as in leadership, which is, you can be building side by side with somebody, and man, you're outside of your spouse, it's probably about as close as you're ever going to be to somebody, and then you realize you're a year or two into it, and you're like, man, that's not what we're doing. And how do you do that well? How do you do that with honoring their journey, honoring your journey, and not, you talk about running someone else's race, that if you're unwilling to run their race, or they're unwilling to run yours, how do you honor that instead of making it a dispute, right? Because so it's
Hmm.
much easier to fight about that than it is just looking and saying that. And I think that probably has been one of the hardest spots of the journey, is in those moments. Are you willing to walk that out really well, walk that out, the uncomfortability with other people, and then still maintain the relationship in the midst of that?
And I would assume that the way you walk that the right way is depending on the situation. But are there any is there any advice that you think
Yeah.
would help someone that needs to make that decision?
Mm.
Anything that has helped you that you would replicate in other situations?
I would say, don't, I think we assume other people's intentions. Don't do that. Don't
Mm.
assume their intentions, right? I think people may have different skill sets. They have certainly different backgrounds, different childhood bring-ups, different experiences. So they bring all that to work. And, when we look at our own behaviors, we assume the best intentions. And a lot of times when we look at others' behaviors, we assume the worst. We assume the person who cut us off in traffic saw us and hates us, right? So like everyone gets mad in traffic. And so we assign that to other people, but sometimes at work we do that as well. And so I think if you ask open-ended questions, assume the best intentions, assume people come to work to actually do a good job. And most people do, some people don't, but most people do. And so even if the work's not living up to that standard or they're not coming along, still assume the best, but you still then have to judge them by the outcomes and hold people accountable to those outcomes, right? So you have to walk out both. But just because they're missing, let's say that just because they're missing their goals doesn't make them a bad person. It just makes them a bad fit for what they're doing at that company. And so to make sure we're not personalizing what doesn't need to be personalized.
Yeah. Focus on the action, not on don't judge the person.
Amen. Yeah.
Chris, what is the most important thing that you learned about yourself as you're walking this leadership journey?
There's no destination, right? It's just a journey. And so what I think is, like, at first I'm like, you have career trajectories that kind of go up and can go this way. Sometimes they flatten out for people. Sometimes they feel like they go down. For me, I wanted my life to just continue to grow and learn. So then you realize, oh man, there's no end to that, right? About growth. And so that got me first intimidated and then really excited. Is that, in a part of my career where you could take your foot off the pedal, I'm actually the most excited I've ever been on the projects that I get to work on. I'm most excited about the people I work with, partly because I've learned from so many others, but partly because I've seen people finish well. But that is constantly a journey. Like, use everything as a learning opportunity. Use every, don't say for people that are kind of, in their 50s where I am, and a lot of times what people happen is they say, well, I don't want to learn all this new technology. I don't want to learn. And you end up putting barriers on yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to be hip. It doesn't mean you have to be like cool, because you know me a little bit. I'm not hip or cool. I'm not, that's not how I am. What I do strive to stay is modern. And I want to understand, like, okay, I might not go on and do TikTok dances. That's probably good for everybody that I don't do that. But I should understand how TikTok works in my business. I should understand how Instagram moves from this to this, and how that advertising works in my business, or at least be able to communicate with people in my business that do understand that. And I should validate that those are active business things. So often I think people get to a level of success, and then they allow their comfort to overrule what the business needs. And so if I view it constantly, it's all a journey and it's all learning. And then lastly, it's all not mine, right? Leadership is not about you. It is about all the people you serve. Well, then I want to keep learning and be my best. I want to maybe go do some classes and humble yourself to go learn next to some 20-year-olds, or, in a class or some, and learn those things so that you can be the best you can be. You can be inspired again and keep yourself in those environments. So if I had advice to anybody is continue to put yourself in kind of uncomfortable environments, cause you to humble yourself and allow for learning. And I think you really can continue to grow your leadership journey from wherever you are to wherever you want to go, step by step by step.
Step by step by step. That's so important. Not skipping steps. I started, now it's not recent anymore, but I started a tradition on this podcast that I ask the guests that I'm talking with to recommend a book that I will send to the next person, not knowing who the next person is. Yeah. So I'm curious, Chris, what is a book that you tend to recommend again and again, and why?
That's a great question. So, I probably the book, it's funny. I read a lot. And so when everyone's asking this, I have to go back and go, okay, what have I read recently? But the one I think for any leader that kind of goes back is Marshall Goldsmith's "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." It's probably one that's been recommended a bunch. But I go back to that. I read a lot of John Maxwell. I love that. But that, if I was going to say like one book, I think that Marshall really captured that whole idea of the constant journey of leadership, and how the skill sets that, really spoke to me, because the skill sets that got me to a manager role were not going to get me to an executive role. And I had to be willing to give those up to grab on to the other ones and really develop those skills and move past my natural talents to then really where I had to develop skills to lead at a higher level. And so that was a really formative book for me, probably the time it came out versus the age I was. But I think that's really one of those. If I had not that I'm going to ask you to send 2 books to somebody, but I do think the 5 Dysfunctions from Patrick Lencioni was another one that I really came in at a right time, and I find myself referencing all the time when I'm looking at how a team functions, and do we really function well to live out that really healthy organization, or that strong organizational health.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your journey, because I assume that there are so many people who want to be leaders, but they don't even know where to start, where they don't even know what's that first step to know what is the next and the next and the next. And knowing someone's journey, as like seeing your journey, your profile, where you are now, and so seeing how you did it, I believe that can inspire them for them to start making their moves towards where they want to be in terms of their leadership. So I want to thank you again for this time. I really honor it, and I wish you all the best in growing on this never-ending journey.
Thanks. You too. I'm really inspired by what you're doing. Again, I think people don't always think about the amount of strength it takes to put yourself out there, and you're putting yourself out there. And I love that you're doing that and bringing people along for the journey. So thank you and bless you.
Thank you. I appreciate the support, Chris. I hope this episode gave you some inspiration for reaching your goals. If you found it useful, please hit the subscribe button. This will help me bring you more inspirational stories to support your own journey to point B. Thank you.